Hi everyone and welcome to the next game in the Capablanca series. This time we're going to look at a game he played in 1918 against the many-time Canadian national champion, John Stuart Morrison. Morrison had the white pieces and opened with e4, after which came e5, knight f3, knight c6 and bishop b5, so the Raul Lopez, and in particular the Steinitz variation after d6, which Capa was fond of using. Despite resulting in sometimes cramped positions, it's solid, if a bit passive, for black. Play continued with the book line, knight c3, knight c3, bishop d7, d4, e takes d4, knight takes d4, and g6. Capablanca stresses the importance of a kingside fianchetto when playing the Steinitz variation against the Raul Lopez in his book Chess Fundamentals. He points out the pressure it exerts down the long diagonal in particular, and throughout this game it's a very well placed piece. Also, he stresses the defensive solidity of a king behind a fianchetto bishop as another strong reason for playing in such a fashion. Play continued with knight f3, which is not an especially good move because of the loss of tempo early in the opening. So then came bishop g7, bishop g5, knight f6, queen d2, h6 and bishop h4, which Capa said was an error of judgment. Morrison wanted to keep the knight at f6 pinned here by the bishop. But what's more important in the position is to prevent black from castling immediately, and playing instead bishop f4 would have achieved this. So now Capa can castle, and Morrison answered that by castling queenside, which boldly makes his intentions clear, but also shows imperfect judgment, because it makes black's bishop at g7 an even stronger piece. Now, with the white king castle queenside, it's become a powerful attacking weapon. Capablanca writes, "The strategical disposition of the black pieces is now far superior to white's. Therefore it will be black who will take the offensive." The game continued with rook e8 and then rook h1 in order to defend the e4 pawn from the threat of g5 from black, and after the bishop moves, knight takes e4. And now Capa played g5 anyway, which was an unexpected move but a good one, and Capa gave himself an exclamation mark for it, stating, "Now that the king's rook is in the center, this rook here, black can safely advance, since in order to attack on the king's side, white would have to shift his rooks, which he cannot do so long as black keeps up the pressure in the center." So bishop g3 and knight h5, unmasking the bishop on g7, and also preventing white from playing e5, which can now be answered if e5, then knight takes g3, h takes g3, knight takes e5, winning a pawn. So, instead of that, Morrison played knight d5, and now came a6, which is driving the bishop away in order to free up the movement of the black pieces and obtain a freer game in general. And here black already has a small advantage. So bishop d3 and bishop e6, which is taking aim at white's king and preparing a violent attack. So c3 from Morrison, which is blocking the action of the dark squared bishop here on g7, and also preparing bishop b1, queen c2, and later e5 and queen h7, etc. So black has to keep that in mind and act fairly quickly, and f5 is what Capa played. And it's very unusual with opposite side castling to see especially GMs move the pawns in front of their king. Usually it's not a good idea, but when you have the ability to judge positions like Capablanca, then it's okay. And this in particular is a great move that aims either to win white's dark squared bishop or to cut it out of the game. The threat here is f4, and Morrison answered with h4. So Capa played f4 anyway, which achieves the initial goal of locking the bishop out of the game. And one of the many things for which Capa was famous was for locking pieces, usually bishops, of his opponent out of the game and getting an advantage, of course, as a result. And that's what this does for the majority of the game. Morrison replied accurately with h takes g5, and Capper answered accurately also with h takes g5. Playing instead f takes g3 is too dangerous. After rook h1, bishop f7, g takes h6, and bishop e5, where white gains 3 pawns for the bishop and retains good attacking chances with minimal immediate counterplay for black. So h takes g5, now rook h1, bishop f7, and king b1, which involves a bad loss of time considering the position, but by Capablanca's judgment, incredibly, he had already won this game, no matter what white played. He suggested instead bishop h2, but Morrison preferred to offer the sacrifice a second time and keep lines open towards the black king, the h file here. So king b1, now knight e5, knight takes e5, rook takes e5, with the idea of swinging the rook over to participate in the attack on the white king later, as opposed to recapturing with the d-pawn or the bishop. So bishop h2 and knight f6. Capablanca writes, now that the white bishop had been driven back, black wants to get rid of white's strongly posted knight at d5, which is blocking the action of the bishop at f7 towards the white king here. And it may be said that the knight at d5 is the key to white's defense. So g3 for Morrison, trying to both get the bishop more involved in the game and break up the black pawns in order to counterattack. And at this stage, Capper points out that the only thing keeping white in the game is the fact that the black rook at a8 is not involved. So knight takes e4, bishop takes e4, rook takes e4, g takes f4, c6, and knight e3. Uncovering finally the bishop at f7, and with an open center here and white's bishop on h2 still uninvolved in the game, the black bishops are extremely strong and well placed. And queen a5 with immediate threats on the white king. And Morrison answered with c4, and even after the exchange of queens, which is the best way for black to continue, black is still much better. As g takes f4, knight g4 and bishop g6, which is threatening rook e1 with a double check from the rook and the bishop and mate if white does nothing about it. And the only move worth considering here is king a1, and that's what Morrison played. But now black has a big advantage, and Capper sealed the game with his usual accuracy and precision. First he played rook a e8, and he writes of this move, at last the queen's rook enters into the game, and soon the battle is over. So a3 from Morrison. And if instead rook takes d6, that pawn is hanging. Now rook e1 check, rook d1 is forced, and a rook 8 e2 is absolutely winning for black, plus 10 pawns, so it's all over. So a3 is what Morrison played. Now rook e1 check, rook takes e1, rook takes e1 check, king a2, bishop f7, threatening mate with bishop takes c4. So king b3, and now d5, which is the quickest way to finish the game, according to Capper. And bishop takes f4, which is a very bad time to blunder, but that's what this is from Morrison. And better here was c5, but even then after d4 check and king a4, black still has a winning advantage over 2 pawns ahead. So it's a matter of technique to win after that. But bishop takes f4 anyway. Now comes d takes c4 check, king b4 and c3, which Fritz gave an exclamation mark for. And now black wins at least a piece because white's rook is threatened, and after he either moves it or takes the pawn, there's rook e4 check, winning the bishop on f4. So bishop b takes c3, now rook e4 check, c4, and rook takes c4 check, which is, you know, the rook is covered by the bishop, so there's no need to take this bishop on f4 straight away. You can win a pawn first, and that's what he did. After king a5, now rook takes f4, rook d8 check, king h7, rook d7, and bishop e6. And here the Canadian champ had had enough and resigned, as he's going to lose yet another piece, and it will just be over very quickly. So that's it, another great game from Capablanca. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave any comments or thoughts. Thanks very much.